Okay, I'm going to resume screen sharing Nerd Squad like I was doing with the preceding live stream. Unit 207, as you saw if you were watching the preceding live stream, just jam-packed full my taskbar here with a whole bunch of things so they could once again force this to close. Why they keep doing that, I don't know. Because they're dumb as fuck and they're going to prison? Yeah? Anyway. Hey, I got an idea, guys. Keep doing the same thing 100 different times and see if you get different results. Just joking. How many felonies does it take to spend the rest of your life in a federal penitentiary? Boom, ching. Less than what some of you have. That's the answer. Less than what some of you have. Whistleblowers, you're supposed to be looking busy and pissed off and perplexed too. Just a little reminder from the Jew in the basement. I bet Louis Theroux was so happy that Bert Kreischer and Theo Vaughn talked about him on their podcast in America today. I hope somebody told him.
No, 100%.
That would make him so
I mean,
happy.
the show
to have
What's
two
weird about
American
doing
fans.
a show that has a format like that is,
but,
I mean, you and I have probably become experts at hitting the eject button on boring conversations or uncomfortable conversations, just in the kinds of lives that we lead, you know? But when you have a format, there's no breaking yourself out of it. You know, you're just on to the next wing, on to the next wing,
I'm going
on to the next wing.
Stop
you
the
can't
screen
get out
share
of what could be potentially kind of a back and
for the
forth
time
when
being.
you're stuck in the format. There's also, you know, maybe you experience this where it's hard for me to look back at old stuff because I'm always wincing and I'm always cringing at the younger me. But there is a side of me that I kind of like when I look back, and that's just sort of the obliviousness of it all. You know, like when you're...
Oh, you know, I don't know if I already said it, but this is a consensual recording of Mystic Gwen pursuant to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It is 8:09 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Tuesday, February 25th. 2025. There's a great deal of things that we could go over, but I'm not inclined to do so. I'm bleeding out of my vagina. I'm really annoyed by people who are requesting to go to prison. And then I have like weird instructions, some of which I can't say, some of which I can say. And I've said a lot of everything that I need to say a few times today, so I just don't feel inclined. The most important thing is if this live stream ends for any reason without me orally and explicitly telling you the end time, I didn't end it. Some domestic terrorist upstairs ended it. Some who need to clock out. The girl and the boy that are fucking anxious as fuck upstairs and just doing too much, go to fucking McDonald's and pay $1 and get yourself a vanilla cone. Then I want you to go for a walk or sit in your car and eat your ice cream cone and then re-enter Unit 207 to be a dumbass. Okay?
Young and naive in this
Go
whole
get
thing.
an ice cream cone. Leave the building for fucking 10 minutes for the rest of us.
Big and expectations and pressure to perform and all of these things.
I'm not talking to everyone upstairs. I'm talking to two specific individuals that I want to go fucking far away for like 30 minutes.
I often think like it's there's aspects of the approach that improve, like, and then sometimes you hear it in music too. You know that classic thing of bands, you like the first 2 or 3 albums when they didn't really know what they were doing, somehow it was all more interesting, whereas the band themselves like, I think we're doing the best stuff we've ever done, but it sounds overproduced and and sort of safe in some way. And I think, you know, there's a risk with that in the kind of in TV making or interviewing as well, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lack of refinement that is painful for me to watch, but something that I wish I still had and I'll never get back. You know, when I watch old stuff, and particularly with that episode, DJ Khaled in particular, I'm like, oh, there's little spots of this guy who doesn't really know the stage that he's on or what it's going to become, and there's a freedom in that I really miss and that I forgot even existed. But
you're a little bit cheeky with him.
Like, yes.
Because your graciousness is a hallmark of your approach. And I remember when I was on the show, what I was struck by, because I wasn't super familiar, I'd seen a couple of episodes, but what I didn't appreciate was how well posed and well constructed your questions were. And also, how do I put this? How your delivery was so poised to the point of seeming quite formal, right?
Yeah, right.
That you weren't a kind of zoo. I'd imagine it would be like a slightly more bro format of like, come on, we're gonna do this. Let's go crazy. And actually, it's something much more
it's gentle
and poised. But actually, those early ones, there's a tiny bit more cheekiness to it. Or maybe, I mean, that's my perception.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. There definitely was, and I think there was a naivete that was there. There was a youthful ambition that was there. And there was also too just not clearly defining what we were or who we were going to be. Like that was the idea early on, is that it would be this internet sideshow that we'd maybe do 4 times a year. It'd be kind of almost like an internet Super Bowl. We didn't think we'd be programming it regularly or anything like that. And I think in that time, that was the idea, that it should be this hot wing, bro down, spicy sort of event. And over time, I think what we realized, especially with this cult audience that we were building, was that we needed to improve on the interview aspect of the thing. So you'd have this unique format, and then what is alongside of it, just an unimpeachably excellent interview show. And then if you could combine those two things, something very familiar, the X's and O's, the oldest construct in the history of media, the interview, and then combine it with this unique hook where we're having our guests eat increasingly spicy chicken wings over the course of the interview as a way to break them down. If you can combine those things, then maybe that's how you can last for 23, 24, 25 seasons and beyond, and make this show last for 10 years. I think if we had that old approach, it would have worn out quite quickly. I think that making for the guest what is the most comfortable, least comfortable interview show is what it's allowed us to book it for these times afterwards. But there's definitely sides of me or parts of the personality that just because you don't know what you're doing come out. And I do miss some of them, do not miss others though.
You're in an interesting place now, right? Your show is huge. It's a YouTube show. Like, that might have felt like a put down a few years ago, and yet in this media landscape, that's just as viable a platform as any other. In fact, in some ways more so, right? I think that at the same time, there's this veneration for old media, for late night, CBS, ABC, the traditional format, but you're competing alongside those shows. You're also, I believe, eligible for an Emmy now in the it's not like a daytime Emmy, like a regular, what do you call it? Primetime Emmy, right? So there's this strange feeling in which I think no one can work out whether this is your stepping stone to a real show, right? Or whether you are the real show. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I like so to illustrate that, this is the world's longest question, but I was looking on Reddit. I often like to get a temperature of what people are thinking about stuff. I go on Reddit, and so someone goes, Sean Evans, they misspelled your name, never mind. They go, he is probably one of the best hosts out there. Why hasn't he been elevated higher?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you seen that?
No, you know what? I stay off the message boards as much. I stay off the message boards, but it's an interesting
Smart guy,
thought.
and I like his mic. Does it have some sort of
the way that I look at it is honestly, there's no one that I'd trade with. Like, I don't look at anybody else's show, anybody else's lane, and feel any sort of envy or motivation or inspiration to achieve that. You know, like, what I have to me is the perfect show for me. It's a very comfortable captain's chair that when I sit in it, I know where all the buttons are. I feel great doing it, very comfortable doing it. And the show's huge. You know, like these shows that we compete with, I mean, I don't know, like interview to interview, episode to episode, it actually favors us. You know, like the eyeballs, ears, attention, these shooting stars in the constellation of pop culture that we do quite frequently, episode to episode. I don't know, I take hot ones over the field in that case. And then in terms of, you know, I work with people I love. You know, you say doing a YouTube show, I've done like a TV game show with where there's 100 people working on it versus this show where there's 12 people working on it, when there's 1 million chefs in the kitchen, when, you know, our show where there's only a couple, and we figured out through many years of doing this how to solve conflicts, solve problems through each other. And I wouldn't trade it for anybody else. So I do think that I have exactly what I want. And the only thing now is to just think interview, next interview, next interview. Like, I'm just a Pac-Man. Like, I just like to eat the next pebble. And right now I just feel perfectly put on a track to do that. And I know that once this is all gone for the rest of my career and for the rest of my life doing this whole thing, I'll know and never take for granted the lightning that we caught in a bottle, and how I'll always be trying to capture what I have again. So now I just try to appreciate it, and there's no carrot on the stick that I'm chasing right now, other than just the next episode.
You mentioned Pac-Man, and then I know this is going to seem like a strange segue, but I wanted to ask you about being bald. Because I'm going bald, and we can come back, because I want to come back.
Yeah. Let's talk about this.
I'm losing my hair. I've got alopecia.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm going to do something I've never done before. No, well, thank you. If I go down, can you see anything there?
Yeah.
There's little patches, and 2 years ago.
Wait, for real? You can get alopecia when you're just in your like 50s?
Slight exaggeration, but I basically had a big, thick, kind of red setter-like, touslable. I want to think you're
that's
trying to
hardcore, man. It's hard to not have eyelashes. That's what's hard not to have. Alopecia, you lose all your hair.
This is very much a sidebar. I can't believe I feel like I've pulled off the highway to look at a thing. Like, this was the view we pulled off to look at. Like, do you know what I mean? Let's get back on the road. But now we've pulled off. So what was it stressful for you going bald? You shaved quite early. What was behind all of that? And do you have any advice?
Yeah. First off, so to me, it was never a big deal going bald. You know, my dad's bald. You know, I had an idea that this whole thing was coming, and so I did shave my head. But you know, like in junior high and high school, I had a shaved head. I think just as a style, I naturally drawn to it, I guess. So when I started to lose my hair, I never really stressed out about it, and I still don't stress out about it because I think I just prefer the taking the clippers to yourself, not worrying about figuring out a haircut situation or whatever, you know, like to just take that bull by the reins yourself was to me kind of a nice thing that I also wouldn't.
Here's the thing. I think bald but having sideburns and a beard,
is it bothering you when you start to lose your hair? Is it become kind of
it looks
become kind of fixated on it? Are you trying to do anything preventative to stop it?
Kind of. Fixate is a strong word. I'm conscious of it. Every time I look in the mirror, I'm trying to figure out, is it getting worse? Is it slightly getting better? I don't have a great shaped head. Like, you have a great head. And
thank you.
And I feel like I don't. And I kind of got used to the idea of coasting into late middle age as one of those guys who still had a pretty good head of hair. And my wife said, well, you could think about a wig, which is not what I wanted to hear.
Right.
Like, do you know what I mean? I definitely don't want a wig. So yes, I'm a little stressed about it.
Do hair transplants.
Does that sort of answer the question?
Elon did them. Theo
well, I think
did
we're
them.
trying to answer each other's
I don't think guys
questions
need
here
them.
a little bit. So I don't know. To me, it just was never that big of a deal.
I think that the way
head,
that guys feel about going bald is very much underrated by
just
females.
embrace it.
And it's never felt
I
like
think men like their hair just as much as
your,
women.
Your swag.
No, not really. But though I do sometimes.
And the
wonder,
ones that
you know,
don't, they're
when
usually
you're on
in
TV
martial
and you
arts,
present
so
all
they're
the
fine
time,
with shaving
there's
it
maybe
all
a
off.
part of you that is like, oh, well, I'm not as handsome as the other people on TV, or I don't have TV hair. Or like, you can start to analyze yourself in a way that's probably not healthy. But I think overall, I have a comfortable sort of, this is how I look. There's nothing I can do about it. But just, it hasn't slowed me down yet. So why question things is basically how I look at it. You know, try to eat well, try to sleep well, try to get some time in the gym. And
I like him.
if you
He
lose
seems
your hair,
nice.
you lose your hair.
I think I've seen this show because there was some show that Chelsea Handler was on, but only for like 10 minutes where she ate hot, spicy wings.
The same thing. I'm thinking like, well, if I'm not going to have hair, then I better make sure I've
and that's what it said.
In shape.
The show was.
What do you
See,
think
I
is
love
your
spicy
skill
foods,
set?
but
Like,
I hate chicken wings.
We could talk a bit about how you got into. I'd like to come to you in a minute about how you got into hot ones and the backstory and coming up in terms of like managing the show and your presence on camera. What are you bringing to the party?
I think that I can synthesize information. I think I can present it in a way, you know, sometimes these questions have context up front. There's like a hinge point before it ever hits the dismount. I think, you know, getting all of that out in a way that somebody watching the show can follow along from guest to guest. Even if they know nothing about the guest, they can follow along with the story because you have that context up front, and then the questions can be kind of elaborate. So I think there's a certain rhythm and syntax and style
really
to all of that that I
he?
think is unique. And then
like
overall, I think there's just a general willingness to go with the flow, not unlike you. You know, if you're going to go on an experience with someone, you're just going to try to lean into it a little bit, have kind of a paper lion experience with it all.
Was that a George Plimpton reference?
Yeah, that was a George Plimpton reference.
Nice. The patron saint, the godfather of participatory journalism, a brilliant urbane literature.
Legend.
I love Shadowbox. Have you ever read that?
No, but I'll put that on my list for sure.
He got in the ring with Archie Moore and like did 3 rounds with a light heavyweight, I think, and got his nose broken for the privilege.
So I'm not necessarily, I'm not like diving into that kind of experience with other people. And certainly like you've done these things that are much more immersive, but in sort of going with the flow on the show where, it can go sliding a million different directions. I'm not that rigid in like maintaining my host thing, like I'll go along for the ride with someone else. And then the other skill set I bring is obviously eating these scorching hot chicken wings so consistently, which is also, I think, kind of a unique thing I bring to the table.
On that
So just a friendly reminder to all of the whistleblowers and whatnot. Remember, there was more than a couple of individuals that were in good/excellent standing Saturday evening for refraining from some things that the FBI didn't want you guys to do. I still haven't gotten clarification as to whether or not their op was fucked up last night. So I don't know if I'm getting that clarification or what that means. But just a reminder, as of Saturday evening, there was more than a couple of people in good standing directly above me. It was said in such a way that highly suggested both units above me had people in them, which the FBI was watching.
Matt, I know you've said that you're not a spicy guy like by nature, and you didn't grow up like craving spices.
And then remember, there's only a handful of people the FBI wants to throw in prison, and then there's another handful of people that are just so dumb they're going with them.
You did, and I recommend people check it out. I mean, he obviously had a plan, and his plan was.
Either way, I think we can all be grateful that it's almost over.
A kind of deranged macho man.
It's almost over.
No, spice was no obstacle. Like, he's not only going to eat the wings, he's going to start
the phase where you guys are being asked to perpetrate domestic terrorism and 100% at risk of retaliation, and the part where I'm forced to stay locked in here eating fucking
thankfully,
lentils.
He was in good hands. He had Dr. Arroyo, his physician. Not the best physician, but very affordable.
He brought his own sidekick, who apparently is one of his writers, which was a good bit. I felt after I saw that, I was like, oh, that's why he's a professional and I'm whatever I am. Do you know what I mean? Because he'd actually scripted the whole fucking encounter. It was amazing, brilliantly, right?
Yeah, I mean, growing up on him is, one of the prevailing influences and inspirations for me to get into.
And on that note, I also haven't heard anything about the fuck you to the lawyers or the members of the bar that was supposed to arrive today or tomorrow that only they would catch. But I'm going to speculate here that it has nothing to do with these live streams. And I haven't heard anyone upstairs discussing that. I mean, I have heard the Jersey Devil, not since like 3-something. But I'm just throwing that out there. Whatever it is, it can't be too bad of a fuck you, because remember, a couple of weeks in March, as long as nobody breaks in, and you got the whole of March as long as the op wasn't fucked with last night, i.e. as long as those they wanted to blow their tops blew them. And I'm going to speculate, I haven't gotten confirmation on that, because the FBI either wants to keep someone on their toes that's watching these live streams, doesn't want me to relay it, or they don't want me to say directly, nobody's going to jail till April for some other reason. That's a cop. Anyway, that's where we're at.
To something like this, and I think.
But was he okay afterwards?
Yes, I think, he has such pathological kind of commitment to the bit that he's riding all the way through. And I think no matter what kind of obstacle you put in front of him, for the sake of comedy, he'll always go there. Like there's a little bit of a
said that to him. You go like, I love your commitment to the bit. And he was like, this isn't a bit. This is life.
This is life. This is life. And I think it is. I think it is for him. So no matter what he was going through, I've heard him talk a little bit about how he'd gotten sauce under his wedding ring, it burned his finger. He was obviously very uncomfortable. But in the aftermath, I think it was just the high of the performance, then perhaps a little bit of that spice influence. But
aren't there medical side effects to that?
If you do what he did, I'd imagine you could put yourself through some things, but I can only speak from my own experience. That's doing this 350 times. I've eaten the Carolina Reaper, the world's spiciest pepper, a handful of times.
That was amazing. With the guy, what's the guy's name?
Chili Klaus.
Oh my God, that's incredible. Like, and by the way, so people out in Radioland, if you'd watch 2 things after this, watch Conan, his episode, and my episode. No. Watch Conan and Sean and a guy called Chili Klaus. And Chili Klaus, who sets himself up as, he's like a Scandinavian, he's like, I like to eat spicy food, and it's not a problem. It's very tasteful. When you smell it, it's nice, and you eat it down, and it's not a problem. Then you're kind of patting them. They look a little bit like big strawberries, and handling them and going back and forth. And then the moment comes, 7 minutes in, you both pop one into your mouths, and then what takes place. It's hard to describe. It's really like the Wicked Witch of the West when she's doused in water. Like, it's kind of like the face starts twitching, and he begins hiccuping and going like, "It's very tasteful." And then he's sort of retching and twisting in his seat. It's amazing.
Snapping. Yeah.
Whereas you just sort of go red and your eyes water, and you're kind of shaking, right? Oh yeah, he snaps his fingers
and
together.
Just to clarify, for the smartest and the punky bunch.
Yeah, and that's why he snaps. He says when he eats something
for
really
those of
hot,
you wondering,
that'll have some sort of like
was this a
feedback
bait?
or
Was
feeling
that a
like
bait?
he's going
What
deaf,
did it say
and so
in the
he
description
snaps to remind himself that he's not going deaf. That's what he told me afterwards. But yeah, that whole thing is like giving yourself food poisoning for 12 hours. You know, like
don't
it immediately
worry, I
takes
have
over your
orders
body,
to keep
start
those videos
hiccuping,
marked
and
as private.
I do think
there
there are two different types of reactions to spice. You know, some you get big and turn into kind of a cartoon character, and then some people kind of get tight and try to hold it all in. And I think that's what makes that video fun, is we have both sides of the spectrum represented on that video.
In terms of dream guests, you've said Howard Stern would be a dream, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's one of those things where your impulse is to say, you know, dream guesses, you know, the people who are most formidable to me growing up doing this, you know, which obviously we're talk show hosts like Howard Stern, a radio host, David Letterman. I've had a couple, you know, like from Conan to Jimmy Kimmel, Adam Carolla, you know, some of my biggest influences I've had on. So I think the impulse is to get the other ones on as well. But then that can always be kind of a challenging thing yourself, or be careful what you ask for situation. You know, have you ever sat down with an icon of yours and, you know, it can either go really, really well and you can feel fulfilled by that, or it can feel kind of flat and empty and maybe be filled with disappointment. You know, that kind of be careful what you wish for, meet your idol's thing. So I'm always on the fence about that.
Yeah, what does a disappointing guest look like?
To me, I think Hot Ones is a show that to do it, you kind of have to want to do it. And I do think that every once in a while, there's someone who's convinced to go on by a publicist, the studio, or whatever. And then they kind of get into it. And usually sometimes we can win those people over in real time, you know, like around the second or third, you can see their shoulders drop when they have the same perception you have, where it's like, oh, I thought this would be like a bro down wing interview show, but it's kind of not. So sometimes you can get that kind of out of them, but sometimes you can't. I'm actually surprised that a clash of personality or a clash with the format doesn't happen more frequently. But every once in a while it'll happen, and that'll be like, it's kind of a bummer. Because I think when you do something, you have some sort of plan for how it's going to go. And if it goes as well as you have planned, then that's a thumbs up. Oftentimes it'll go better than your plan, 2 thumbs up. And then every once in a while it'll go a little worse than you planned. And then you'll kind of get into the lab and figure out, you know, I personally, I kind of always put that kind of thing on me. You know, I always kind of think that's more my fault than the guest.
Wow, you're such a man. You've got a nice attitude, and I think that's a big part of the success of the show. And it's sort of what you were saying earlier, which is that in a weird way, and I've said this in relation to my documentaries, is that actually you sort of have to prioritize reality over the product. Like, in other words, it's the number one is making sure everyone is okay. Do you know what I mean? And having
right.
a kind of like you're treating people like human beings and not as a means to an end. And then things tend to go more smoothly, if that makes sense.
I 100% agree with that. Yes, you try to create a connection, a natural rhythm, and I think too in an interview a sense of trust that you're trying to build, and then you're doing it in this very bizarre context of it being on a TV show, and of course someone that you're meeting for the very first time, and just trying to create this natural, genuine energy between the two of you. I think that's fundamental, that you have to approach it that way first. And if it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well. But shockingly, it usually goes well.
Now, as a bit like Hot Ones, as the podcast goes on, the questions get spicier. Did I mention that?
No, but I like it.
I just made that up. Would you book Trump?
I'm not that enthusiastic about a political candidate. And the reason for that is because, you know, it's not really the best format for a politician in that you are naturally rooting for the guest to get through the wings, you know, and it is a show that I think celebrates more than it scrutinizes. And it kind of almost has to be that way, because if, you know, you're closing the walls in on the guest in like sort of a capital J sense, and then you're like, all right, now on to the bomb beyond insanity, you know, like to keep a guest engaged in that, I think there has to be like a certain sort of going up this mountain together thing that I think the audience also feels. So in that way, the format, I think, does detract from the gravitas that I think is required of interviewing an official, a presidential candidate, a sitting president, a former president, or whatever. That said, the views would be crazy.
They'd be off the charts.
You know?
Again, this question, we're going up the Scoville scale. You ready?
Yes.
I'm right here with you. I think you pulled one episode, right? Maybe there's more, but the one I'm aware of is Mario Batali.
Yeah.
Because he was subject to allegations of, I guess, serious sexual misconduct. But there are a couple still on there. Russell Brand is one.
Yeah.
Another one is Shia LaBeouf, I believe.
Yeah.
What is behind the decision-making process when you decide who stays up, who comes down, who you can book, and so forth?
Well, generally speaking, I think once you put something up, you put something up. And I think it's sort of an unfair responsibility to think that like a talk show is somehow like responsible for someone all the way through with what they do. And I personally don't really like the idea of, okay, we're just going to completely erase somebody. We're going to take all the movies off of Netflix. We're going to take all the music off of Spotify and just pretend that none of this stuff ever existed before. Just in general, I think that requires more. And should talk shows be the judge, jury, and executioner in that sort of case? I do sometimes like think that, you know, you can have these conversations, but I don't know. There has to be some sort of specific policy. I don't think you can just in the moment be like, oh, well, like this person was in the news this week, you have to take that thing down. With the Mario Batali episode in particular, I think that it was one of those where we put it up and then that stuff all hit like within hours or like a day of the upload. And there were some other things that kind of led to us taking down that episode permanently. But generally speaking, I think it's a little dubious to like go and wipe your history and try to make some sort of pristine back catalog. I mean, even with you, I know, didn't they take down your like Rogan episode or something like that?
Yeah. How did you know that?
I did. Well, because I'm a fan of yours, Lou, but I know they did that, but it's like, I don't know. Some of these things just seem kind of arbitrary. And
by the way, I don't think I think I said this because I was on Theo Von's podcast and they took down my first Rogan episode, but I'm convinced it was because it was too boring.
Maybe that, yeah.
Although that seems weird that they would do that, but I there was just nothing in that. You know, in the when you think of the full gamut of what Joe Rogan's podcasts were like, I don't know. I just can't believe there was anything that spicy in that conversation.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's what I get worried about is like drawing those particular lines and then actioning on it, and then I don't know, like what does it even do or whatever, you know, like, oh, we're just going to take all the movies off, take all the music off, pretend like no interviews ever happened, you know, in that way, maybe there are these conversations that you can have, but I do think you have to have some sort of specific policies set in place if you're going to make those kinds of actions. So I don't know. That's the way that I look at it. It's like,
also, it's quite possible that I'm not being told whether or not the op was fucked with because everybody listening to this while it's set on private would likely be very aware whether or not one of the individuals blew their fucking top. Because if Miss 80 plus years blew her fucking top, then the operation was a success. And she sure has been spending a lot of time outside of my door for days. And yesterday was Monday at sundown. I'm just throwing that out there as speculation. This live stream isn't going to be public until a specified date, just like all the others from today, aside from the ones that are already public, or the one. Is there one or two that are public that were in today? I don't remember.
Like if we put something out, I'd feel weirder about like whitewashing history than I would about just leaving it up.
What about the artist formerly known as Kanye?
We've never shot with him. He seems impossible to put into a format. Like, I don't know how you could do like all right, now we eat the first wing. Here's a question. Here's an answer. Now we eat.
There's also something going on with the FBI where they are intentionally trying to prevent anyone from going to prison by acting on instructions over roughly the next 40-ish days. I'm sure everyone upstairs listening to me knows more than I what that's about. Anyway, that's part of the reason why they were comfortable enough to say that if nobody broke in and nobody fucked with their operation, that now no police officers will be detained until April. But I don't know about what the around 40 days thing is. It was said to me like some of the individuals they're excited to put in prison have deadlines they want to meet in about the next 40 days. And the FBI wants to see who's going to help them try to meet those and fail and go to prison with them or not. It wasn't said explicitly like that, but that's what was implied.
Eat the second wing, question, answer. Now we eat the third wing. And Kanye is somebody who, as
But then they made that comment about how they could put everybody in jail before next Tuesday if they wanted to follow ahead with her plans. So obviously, she doesn't take no for an answer. I think we all fucking know that. I mean, literally.
an artist, probably has more mileage
Even the
in my
sheriffs
headphones
know
than
that.
any other musician ever.
Right.
And remember, she's not the head of the snake. She's
So,
not
and
the
he
top
was-
tier.
When you were coming up, you know,
She's
as
like
a young
number
man, that would
3
have
or
been the
4.
soundtrack, I'm sure.
For sure. College Dropout. I remember, you know, when I was in college and it came out. So in that way, he seems so impossible in that respect that I don't know if I'd be
She
excited
might be number
for
2 at this
that kind
point.
of opportunity.
Be a tricky one.
But I know she's not the shark. And that is the individual that I'm most excited to see who the fuck it is. Who is it that the FBI mostly brings? Remember, they've had the shark via multiple harpoons since December. It might be someone that's retired, since apparently more than one individual attempted to retire to avoid detainment
this
and
Bloomberg
arraignment.
story that says, quote, "The future of the show is uncertain." Basically, they're saying that BuzzFeed has been trying to sell First We Feast, which is the parent company above Hot Ones. I mean, one of the discoveries in researching this was that you are, how do I put this? I guess you're not like an owner of Hot Ones. Like, it's not like Amelia de Moldenberg,
right,
a Chicken Shop Date, that you were in sense brought on as a presenter / writer host. And I don't want to put it bluntly, but in theory they could fire you, right?
100%.
Replace you.
Yeah.
And it's even been reported that, I don't know, like that you were, I don't know, in a couple of interviews I picked up that there was an aspect of your relationship to the brand that felt not tenuous, but not wholly satisfactory in your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, there's been challenging aspects of this throughout. And I guess the context that I could put it in is, you know, my entire career, the whole digital media industry has been kind of a bloodbath. You know, like I've described it as feeling like that final scene in Fight Club where all of the skyscrapers are falling down around you and the ground is always shaking under your feet too, you know, and you just feel like it's only a matter of time before the floor gives out on you. And that's kind of been my whole experience, my entire career. You know, like I came in after the peak and after all the dreams were sold on this kind of industry. And then now I'm here at its current state. But I think those pressures have made us resourceful, have made us do the most with the least, and I think have been a source of strength overall. Like I think net then I wouldn't change anything about being this rose that's grown in concrete. Or like this wouldn't be the first time, like I've probably been threatened out of my, threatened to lose the seat countless times, like over this whole journey, which can be taxing. But I think the thing that I've always prioritized.
Seriously, like, unpack that. What does that mean? You've been threatened to lose the seat countless times.
Oh, I think like every negotiation or like any new thing, it's you can always hear that kind of like, oh, well, you've been doing this for a long time. Be ashamed if someone else did it. Like there's always that.
Who do you report to?
Me, I'm kind of an island at this point, you know what I mean? But you'll just kind of hear things like through an agent or whatever. So I think also too, that's just like entertainment, like if you have a show, like, yeah, it's different now that people can kind of boutique, become their own media companies. But
in a way, you're straddling two things here, because obviously you've got the Mr. Beasts of this world, right? Who he's a self-created entity, unless he's absolutely cancelled off of YouTube, in which case you go to Rumble, but he is in effect unfireable.
Right.
And I think a lot of people would look at you and think, hey, Sean's the same kind of deal. But it turns out it's not quite the case. There's this overhang of this relationship you had when you were coming up and you were hired onto the program when you were working at Complex, right? And so you own the brand in the eyes of the public, but behind the scenes, it's not quite that simple, right?
No, and sometimes I look back and think about ways that I could have exercised leverage a little bit differently. But the problem is like when you have that kind of pressure on you, the thing that's always been my North Star through all of this is just always feeding the show. And I stay true to that North Star, which has always pulled me through and saved me through these whole things, which is you can't stop a hit. Like as long as people like and watch this show, then I don't think you can stop it. It's not in anyone's best interest, especially now in this day and age where it's so hard to have something that breaks through. The idea that an industry could just purge hot ones just cause or whatever, it doesn't make any sense to me. So overall, I think that there's a way for this to just work out well for everyone, set up hot ones for a fruitful future. And that's kind of what I'm focused on now, just episode to episode. And I think as long as you take care of each episode, each season, then it'll be fine on the other end of this. So that's kind of my mindset now. And one day I'll look like a dummy for having this thought process, but it's worked out for me for the last decade.
If you went off with your partner in crime, Chris Schoenberg, right, and set up is he there with you?
Yeah, he's literally to my right.
Is he? You said you started a YouTube chat show called Spicy Wings, right?
Yeah.
And they ate 11 wings. You know what I mean? You tweaked it. You could, in theory, do that, but you'd be starting with a subscriber base of 0, and you'd have to rebuild from the ground up.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing, is just everything that we've put into building this and all that sweat equity and all of that. I think just on the other side of this is a unique time where it feels like something has to break. But overall, I think it'll be fine. We just had one of our biggest seasons ever, maybe our biggest season.
When you said did you just say this is a unique time when something has to break? Did you just say that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I just think that the challenges in the industry and whatnot, like it's just harder for things to stay exactly like this. I think that everybody thinks that, like on both sides of it. I think like the media company, I think.
In what sense?
I mean, I don't know, like there's a lot of money owed, so I think there's like a way in which it's challenged to keep us. And
do you mean because BuzzFeed, the parent company BuzzFeed, is $100 million in debt, right?
Right. So
and Hot Ones is a big success, and it makes $30 million a year, according to this piece anyway, largely from brand and licensing deals. There's like sources and whatnot, and all kind of spin-off stuff. Do you get a piece of that merchandise?
Yeah. Nobody should cry for me in this whole thing. I mean, on that side of thing, obviously you can lose your job, like this stuff that you built for, obviously, but that stuff, let it keep me up at night. Like, doesn't have to keep anyone else up. My life is good.
Vivek Ramaswamy owns 8.9% of BuzzFeed. Did you know that?
You know what? I read interesting updates in the paper all the time.
He might be a good guest.
He might, yeah. He might be the new host.
He might be the new host. But you feel happy, or that's why I can't.
Yeah.
Are you happy?
Yeah, I am. I'm happy doing the show. I think this season has been my this
happy
season,
doing the show,
no
but the
joke.
other stuff, I get it. Like basically, a bit like me. Like you just think I want to make good shows.
Yeah.
Just give me the next thing. I want to research
Yes.
this, make it, and as long as you keep delivering great content, nothing much can go wrong. But
Right.
what I will say is that
And I'm listening.
there are obviously a lot of people who'd be making a lot of money off the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it would be
yeah,
a shame
right.
if you didn't enjoy your just desserts in terms of all of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, these are the conversations that happen, and I think this situation, I guess what's frustrating to me is it seems so transparent and obvious. But whatever, processes like this, they can be slow and ups and downs and kind of a roller coaster, and everybody's playing a game, it can seem like, and then you'll just, but that's exactly how I feel. Is I just want to make good things, you know what I mean? So I don't get so bogged down by the other stuff. To me, I'm not really craving attention or fame or even money, really. Like the high that I get is just off of making a good interview and then delivering it to the world and catching the reaction that gets. Like that's the drug, that's the priority, that's above all else for me. And I've never had that side of it threatened, really, or like not in like a serious way. I guess I used to take those like sort of, it'd be a shame if someone else hosted kind of things seriously.
Has anyone ever actually said that it would be a shame if someone else hosted?
Yeah, I didn't make up that quote.
Really?
Yeah.
Who said that?
That's not only one person, but I think that was a situation
Are you going to eat the wing? Are you going to eat this wing?
Where it was like, here's a shitty contract. You have 24 hours to sign this, otherwise, we're putting someone else. Like that kind of thing, has happened.
This is the bit where I enjoy you eating the spicy wing. It's a metaphor. I appreciate you kind of. I get it, man. It's hard. It reminds me a little bit. I mean, I worked for 20 years at the BBC with no ownership of my programs. I would get a residual, whatever percentage. So I didn't feel badly. In fact, I was grateful for that. And as long as I was making the shows with a sense of security, because I didn't have to worry about running a company or any of that stuff. And I quite enjoyed being, as it were, a factory worker at the BBC, like alongside everyone else, working from contract to contract. And then 5 years ago, I started my own company. And, there's pluses and minuses, but your compensation is better. And then there's a little less security. But you do have the pleasure of knowing that, you're the sort of master of your own destiny.
Yeah, I think, it's just, you fix one corner of the carpet, you can kind of mess up the other corner a little bit. So as long as I never had to compromise creatively or compromise in terms of vision, and I could just do the show, like that was all kind of enough for me. And then even like in a contract negotiation, what I would sometimes do is just have a thing that made me happy, like write it down before so you don't get into this thing. And then once those needs were met, I didn't feel the need to like continue to fight or whatever. I think through all of that, you get a unique insight onto how this whole poker game works and where you're going to kind of sit in it. So even though
I like this guy, even though this is the first time I've seen him.
Written about it,
he's good looking too from
could
the
sound
profile.
like I should,
front of the face,
be in like a stressful situation. Like I said, I've already gotten so much out of it, and I think it'll work out just like it has in the past.
He looks like a
You
hottie
said,
from the
I'll
profile.
say that it's the best interview show, but it's because there's so many bad interview shows. By comparison, we look fucking excellent. That was in 2019.
I said that?
Yeah.
Oh. So I think when we first started doing the show, there really weren't that many good interview shows, especially on the internet. And now I think there are a lot of them. I think the podcast revolution and all of that has kind of crowded the space. And now you get, when I'm watching interviews, there's just so much more I can sink my teeth into now than the landscape when we first started the show. So I might have said that, but I'll walk that back a little bit now, just because I think there are so many good ones now.
For sure. I'm going to say one other thing, and this is totally out of sequence, but you were very kind when I was on the show by giving, I'm sure to all your guests you do this, gave me a kind of a box of all the hot sauces, and
yes.
I went away and I finished all of them with the exception of what seemed to be the hottest one, the bomb, the most problematic one. But what happened was I smashed it on the ground. But I don't know how. I just accidentally knocked it off the table. So I started clearing it up with paper towels. and I was scooping it up. But can you guess what happened?
You,
Burned,
at the end of your
nose,
cleanup,
crying.
touched your face, or you went to the restroom. Is it one way or another? There was a cross-contamination issue. That
Well,
you,
not quite, but not close enough. Basically, my hands started glowing, and I hadn't really realized. Like, I should have been wearing latex gloves.
100%.
Dude,
No
like the
exaggeration,
Simpsons
I would say for
episode
24
with the
hours
nuclear
minimum.
power pepper.
It felt like they were kind of glowing, and I went to bed and I was like, I had to keep them under the pillow because they were so hot and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I didn't touch my wiener or why that didn't cross-contaminate.
Well, good thing it didn't.
Why? What happens when you do that?
Man,
It's like
you have to
bear
pour
macing
milk on it,
yourself.
dude. If you ever get
in your
hot sauce
underwear
on your
or
wiener,
something. You know, like any
pour milk on it.
cross-contamination mistake that you can make, I've made
It's the only
over
way
the
you're getting
years.
instant
And
relief.
I always tell people, be careful around the eyes. You know,
Milk.
there's this natural inclination to want to wipe your eyes when you're on the show because your face starts to sweat. But you really should not do that because you can end up, swiping an eyeball. We've had guests that have had to do the last couple wings kind of like this before. And I always say that. I'm always on top of that. But the number one worst thing you can do is just not thoroughly wash your hands afterwards. Use the restroom, and then you've got a real problem.
Tell me about it. I mean, I'm sure. How is your energy okay?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm here with you.
You're killing it, by the way. Don't touch your eyes. You grew up in Chicago, which like for the British public, they know New York, they know LA. Like those are the two kind of the poles, the twin poles of American culture. And Chicago's a less known terrain, and yet in this sense, it's the more quintessential American city, arguably, being in the Midwest, in the heartland. And also, correct me if I'm wrong, did you grow up in Evanston, or you were born in Evanston?
Born in Evanston, and then grew up in the northwest suburb of Crystal Lake, Illinois.
And Evanston, I believe, is home to some John Hughes films. So in a sense, in film form, it crystallizes an aspect of the American high school experience.
Yes.
Which for certainly people of my generation, movies like 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink and so forth, Breakfast Club, it was so primal and so important. And I mean, I sense that yours was a happy upbringing. You've spoken glowingly of your upbringing. Like for me as a podcast interviewer, that's a challenge because if I can hang my hat on some piece of trauma, it's really helpful. And nothing in the research, nothing is hoved into view, like no major instances of, I'm trying not to trivialize like serious serious issues, but feel free to volunteer something.
Well, you're right in that it was idyllic. In those John Hughes movies, I do feel like I lived a quintessential sort of 90s kid experience, like playing baseball, playing football, riding around on a bike with my friends, like living in a neighborhood where every single house had kids and they were all within like a 3 to 4 year window of each other and everyone's running around in each other's yards and the games and the prom and the, like all of those experiences that I look back on and feel like I'm, happy I grew up that way. But I did have, my mother had cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which was always a storm cloud growing up and passed away when I was a teenager, when I was
Your mother
15
did?
or 16 years old. Yeah.
Okay, I did not know that. What was her line of work?
So she worked for the antitrust division of the U.S. government. So I think like a paralegal breaking up monopolies and stuff.
She'd be going for Google big time.
Yeah.
She'd be kicking their butt. Who are they going for at the moment? Is it Bill Gates or I think they're going for Google, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the antitrust division of the federal government's pretty busy these days. They're certainly a lot more busy than it used to be. But I do have like just sort of strange memories of growing up and like remembering a time where, she'd have to like watch confidential surveillance video of something. And there was this summer that she was working on a big case and my dad would just be like taking me and my brother to like the batting cages during the day and then a movie in the afternoon and then going out for dinner. And I remember that, like those sorts of experiences when my mom was working on a big case, I remember it just turned into like a fun vacation with me, my brother, and my dad. Like those are the kinds of memories I have from that.
Your dad was a judge. So you had quite a high-powered pair of parents right there.
Yeah, they were.
And, when I interview a lot of creative people, there's a sense like, oh, I was at odds with the world. I didn't fit in. I was an incel. I hid in my books. But I don't know if that was the case for you.
No, I mean, the ways in which my childhood kind of formed is my dad was a Letterman obsessive, and he would tape all of the episodes all week, and then on weekends he'd binge them.
Oh,
and
David Letterman.
Watching
I thought he
Letterman
was
with my
talking
dad
about,
was kind of a fun,
Letterman,
early core memory experience that I
else.
had. And I remember, during the monologue, the crowd would be laughing. I'd always have my dad explain the joke to me. I'd be like, why are people laughing? Well, explain
what years is this?
This must have been in the early 90s, I guess, 1990, 1991, 1992. So I remember watching that kind of thing and being inspired by it, seeing the lights, camera, action of it all. And then also the way that this guy in New York could have this direct connection to my dad in Chicago, and then saw the impact that just on entertainment could have on a person. So that was my earliest memory of that. And then I did become obsessed kind of with talk radio. There was the local radio shows around me. There was the show Loveline, a call-in sort of sex advice thing with Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla that I'd listen to every night. And then, of course, the late night shows, Howard Stern. I would just have the episodes and listen to them at recess and stuff. So that time in my life, that was later on, high school, college era, I'd start doing that.
Stern, in a way, he's not as well known in the UK, but in a sense, the quintessential shock jock. But that doesn't quite do justice to his intelligence and his sense, his sense of humor. It felt like it was right at the edge, and sometimes over the edge of kind of acceptable, but you kind of forgave it because he felt somehow like he was your guy. It's hard to really explain. I think part of it was having Robin Quivers as his sidekick. So he had this sort of great relationship with a black woman who was there kind of reining him in or just providing some sort of counter narrative. You know what I mean? That was part of the dynamic that I think made it okay.
And then I think too, the biggest draw for me early on though was actually the prank calls. I think that it was and when I first started listening to it, it was almost the show was almost connective tissue between prank calls for me. And then ended up kind of just falling in love with the show and the way that it knocked down all the walls and kind of turned itself inside out and presented it to the audience that way. So in that way, I remember being well, I've never heard anything like this. And I'd always be curious, how various news and pop culture events filtered through the brain of Howard and how he'd distill it to his audience. And so those were the sort of the icons that kind of gave me the sense of purpose and confidence that, to pursue a broadcast journalism degree and to think that maybe one day I could be on TV.
One of the quotes was that in high school you could sit at any of the tables in the cafeteria, which I thought was quite a telling metaphor. It doesn't quite, I don't know if it's set up in quite the same way in the UK, whether there's the same level of, what were the different tables? What did they represent?
I think that athletes and would hang out together. I think theater kids would hang out together. I think nerds would hang out together. And I don't think it's that dissimilar from the John Hughes construction of the high school experience. That's not that far off from my lived experience. And I had close friend groups and people that I'd hang out with all the time. But I do think that I was able to switch codes and bounce around from group to group, which is in a way kind of what I'm doing now. It's just you meet so many different big personalities and finding a way to connect with them in some way, especially too because they're all varied and have all different kinds of backgrounds or whatever, and then to just try to connect and input into their thinking and find a rhythm in the way that you're connecting with one another on a show is not that dissimilar from navigating the
friendly
politics
reminder.
of a high school lunchroom.
Friendly reminder.
Friendly reminder. Delicately, and
you should
can leave
never
it on the table if you like.
Feel bad about doing.
Did you enjoy
the right
a lot
thing?
of female attention?
Yeah, it was fine. Yeah. Not like a prom king or not like the Freddie Prinze Jr. version of that teen high school flick. Never that, but no complaints. I think I was in a sort of B, a letter grade B kind of category that whole time. I do remember in 8th grade or maybe 7th grade. Did you just
grade yourself on your sexual attractiveness?
Yeah, at that time. But I do remember when I was in 7th grade, I'd have a cut long hair and then it would be kind of parted down the middle and never had any kind of attention in that way. And then I do remember like in one weekend getting a 98 degrees haircut and my jawline kind of coming in like in the same weekend, and then going to school and getting like giggles behind me and stuff like that. And like, oh, things are kind of changing. So I do remember that kind of moment. But yeah, like overall, like, yeah, like had a girlfriend in high school and did prom and all of those things. Like, yeah, I've never really thought about it because I don't think I've been asked the question to reflect on that, but it was all fine. It was all fine.
If you didn't think about it, that suggests it wasn't an issue. It's a bit like being tall. Like, you don't go around thinking, I'm tall. You know what? I'm going to abandon that metaphor or that analogy. You went from geek to Chad, like just with it. That was.
Yeah, and it was kind of short. It was kind of short-lived. I think I went back down to geek. You know, it was just one week. Like in one weekend, I was off to the races, but I wasn't really built to deal with that. Like I don't think I necessarily was expressing the kind of confidence that went with like the package at that time. So then once people saw that kind of disconnect, I think it faded off. But overall, yeah, like I had like that was all fine.
You know, I'm aware you mentioned that your mum had died when you were, what, 15?
15 or 16 years old. I think I was a junior in high school.
Is there anything you'd like to say about that time?
Yeah, no, I mean, challenging time, obviously, and anyone who's dealt with cancer in the family knows how you go through this dark time and then it goes away. And then it feels like brighter days are ahead. Now you're in a good place. And then it comes back. And then, you know, the chemotherapy, and you see somebody in the house suffering the way that they are. And it's your mom, you know, like all of that stuff, looking back, was a lot to deal with, you know. And in some ways, it's not like it's like a sore subject or anything, you know, like it happened a long time ago and is just part of my experience. And do think about her and wonder what she'd think of this whole kind of crazy life that I'm living now sometimes. But yeah, it was definitely a paradigm shifting moment in my life, as it is for a lot of people, but it's something that pretty much all of us go through.
15-year-olds can be tearaways. I speak as a father of 3 boys, 18, 16, and 9. Was your relationship with your mum in a good place around that time and leading up to it?
You know, it was, but there are like, and this is, you do think about these little things. You know, I remember the very last conversation we ever had was her wondering what college I was going to go to, you know, and to me, I didn't think of it anything more than like my mom nagging me about where I'm going to go to school. But then she passed away within like 48 hours of that. And now that I look back on it, it's like she knew that that was going to happen. So she was trying to get out of me where I'm going to college because she like really wanted that information before she went. And then you think about that now and it snaps into focus and you can feel regret. Like, why did I handle that like that? You know, of course the answer is like I was 15 and that just seemed like one of the million times my mom's like, well, what are you going to do this summer? Like, where are you going to Scotland? You know, like it just felt like one of those conversations. So, but no, it was in a good place other than just the natural kind of way in which all relationships with like teenagers and their parents is imperfect.
Are you okay talking about this?
Yeah, I'm fine talking about it.
I'm curious how long it was from diagnosis to her death, and if you remember the moment when they had the conversation with you that this was happening.
I only remember it and it just being part of my life, my whole life. You know, there'd be times where she'd be going through chemo treatments or whatever and like dropping me off for Little League games when I was like 10 or 11 years old. You know, like I remember those kinds of things. And it's something that started for her when she was in high school. You know, like doctors never thought that she'd have kids and things like that. So it was a battle that she'd been facing since, you know, she was 15 or 16 years old all the way through the end of her life. And I remember my whole life being like, this is a good time, feels like things are going to get better, and then this is a bad time, you know. So I remember being one of those things, but the concern being a little bit different and just sort of the storm cloud over the house being a little bit different. I don't remember the actual kind of conversation, but I do remember there was, you know, like a hospice situation. I think they set up a bed in the living room. One of my best friend's mom was a nurse, and so she came in and was kind of helping out with all of that. And then I remember like kind of on the morning of like when she passed, like just knowing when I like walked downstairs and like the eeriness of like the quiet house and kind of the look on the nurse's face. And then, you know, me just kind of like not saying a word to anybody and going back upstairs. Like, that's kind of what I remember about that morning. And then also I just remember the support, you know, like there are so many people from my life that came to the house that day that dropped off food with well wishes, you know, like I did feel in that moment feelings of support, and then also feeling like I needed to be that too for other people. You know, I have a younger brother who's younger, you know, it's like 15, 16 years old. That's not a great time to lose somebody, but think about that at like 13, 14, you know, feeling like I need to be like a strong big brother in that situation. Also for like what my dad was going through, you know, like trying to give him the grace to not have to be the strong one in this case, which of course he just did anyway. So those are kinds of the memories I have that swirl around that particular time in my life.
Wow. Do you subscribe to a faith? Is that something? Is that part of your life?
I mean, I'm agnostic. I think it's harder for me to believe that this is all for no reason than it is for some reason. You know, like that side of it is harder for me to wrap my head around, that this is just for nothing. But I don't have a jersey. I'm not on a team necessarily.
It's weird when you have kids and you're trying to explain death to them, and as they either someone who's not an observant Christian or whatever, right? There's a temptation to sort of say, well, they've gone somewhere special. They're in the sky. They're with the angels. When you don't really believe that, and then at the same time to say, well, they're dead and you're never going to see them again, and that's pretty much the end of the story. Feels quite harsh, right? Nevertheless, that's the truthful answer. Yeah, so that's the one I give.
The inevitable, the one that we face.
Oh my God. I want to ask a couple more questions. I don't want to take the piss and kind of eat up tons of time. I feel like your journey in some ways was a bit similar to mine, in as much as you came out of a kind of a journalistic training and didn't really see yourself as being someone on TV or someone having a profile necessarily. And yet you became the guy who was up for stuff. Like, you were willing to have a crack at something, right? And there was a time when I guess you'd been hired by Complex, this sort of streetwear company, and there were gigs that would come along for sort of like, I'm going to do this for a day, right? Yeah. And you were the guy, I'll do it. Like, can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, that was kind of the paper line existence. You know, I think it was one of those situations where it's like, well, I don't necessarily see myself in a particular mold on TV or whatever, but I am curious about people, you know, and I think that's been the number one thing that's fueled this whole wave that we're on. So I'm like, okay, what would it be like to eat the Rock's diet for a day and do the Rock's training regimen, you know, like, and just walk a mile in someone else's shoes and see how it plays out. These are all so long ago, but I do remember, I think the Rock one was my first like big video, you know, before Hot Ones, but also too, it did kind of bleed into Hot Ones in a way, because even, you know, just trying to eat the Carolina Reaper, that's just basically jump and see what happens, you know, just edge close to danger and see how it all plays out.
What can you tell me about the Rock's diet? Can you remember anything about his diet?
All I remember is that it's nonstop, and then it would be like
it's a lot of cod apparently,
and brown rice. Yeah, and then it gets served to you on a plate that basically weighs as much as a Range Rover tire. And then it's like, once you eat that, the next one is kind of coming. You know what I mean? So you're never out from under that thing. And then you're eating so much that it's uncomfortable. You're training so much that it's uncomfortable. So that's what I remember most, is how dense and flavorless it kind of all was.
And then basically someone, well, I guess, was it Chris Schoenberg, who talent spotted you, or like he had the idea, or what was the genesis of Hot Ones?
So he was running First We Feast, hey buddy, and that was a food blog. And in 2015, you know, like every media company became a YouTube channel, so he had to launch a show. He had this idea. We had a good sort of like water cooler office relationship that we had going, and he was looking for a host, and I think his pitch email was like, you know, we could have Sean Evans host, you know, because I think, you know, he needed an affordable and motivated human body to shove into the show to make it work. But I think he also had he's like, or if that doesn't work out, I could host, I remember. And when he approached me for the idea, it just seemed so smart and like just such a Cupid's arrow into my brain. And I recognized the potential that it had immediately, and it being a totally singular and unique format. And we shot a pilot, and that was almost 10 years ago. We just haven't stopped shooting them since.
And the rest is history. And actually, strikingly, the first one's only 5 minutes. It's with Tony Yayo. And it's not one of the best, but it's a serviceable episode.
Yeah, a pilot.
It's a kind of a pilot because it's only 6 minutes. We're going to go back to one spicy wing. It isn't really that spicy, but, obviously the report is that BuzzFeed is struggling to sell hot ones for $70 million. Like, that's the headline. Struggling. I resent that because that sounds like it's not a hot brand, and it is. But that's presumably a scenario where you and Chris go out and raise equity and kind of buy it, and then you're your own bosses, and Vivek Ramaswamy can go take a hike, right? And presumably you've talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, candidly, that's kind of an ideal outcome, is to, kind of take back this thing that we created together. And so, I mean, we'll see what happens. There's just a lot of different things that can happen with stuff like this. And in some ways, it's a new experience, but in some ways, it's very familiar to the things that I've had to navigate in the past. So I think ultimately, Hot Ones will find a way, as it always has, through being this little engine that could show. And that's where I land on it. And it is something that I have a lot of endurance for going forward. Like, I don't have the burnout feelings. Like I said, I feel comfortable in the captain's chair, and I wouldn't trade it with anyone. So hopefully with all those things combined, it'll just get us through a challenging time and set us up to do it for another 10 years. That's my hope. And I think that'll happen.
Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that. It was fun talking to Sean. What a lovely man. Can I editorialize like that? They're all lovely, my guests. And Sean especially. Since we spoke, it's been reported that an investment group, including Sean and his co-creator, Chris, purchased Hot Ones from BuzzFeed for $82.5 million. I guess that wasn't all his pocket jingle. Like, they had backers, I'm assuming. And good, that's great. I had the sense talking to him that he wanted to be the captain of his own destiny, and this will presumably enable him to do that. By the way, I've now watched my episode of Hot Ones. It has 2 million views. I slightly wish it was more than that. It's a solid episode, and I think there's some laughs. And I've even watched it, and you might be able to see on YouTube my reaction video. That's how YouTube friendly I am now. I'm actually doing reaction videos, reacting to myself. That's what they do on the internet now. During the chat, Sean said the benchmark for a surprisingly low-performing episode was 3 million, which is 1 million more than mine got. What the hell? What do we do with that? We say there's more work to do. There's people out there who haven't heard the good news about the Jesus Christ of documentary making. That's a blasphemous reference. We also spoke about Chili Klaus, who featured in a video with Sean eating a Carolina Reaper chili. It's such a beautiful video. They look like it's like someone's thrown a hand grenade into a house, and you see their head is the house, right? It's a metaphor, and you just see them imploding visually. His real name is Klaus Pilgaard, although he also performs music under the name Klaus Wunderhits. There's another good video where he forces an orchestra to eat chilies and then try to perform, which we'll link to in the show notes. We mentioned the Mario Batali case. His Hot Ones episode was taken down in 2017 after 4 women accused him of sexual misconduct. Batali was charged with indecent assault and battery in 2019, but cleared of both charges in 2022. I think that might be about it, except for Credits. The producer was Millie Chu. Chew. That's relevant. Right? Because you chew food, hot ones. The assistant producer was Amelia Gill. Gill, that doesn't work. Gill's fish. The production manager was Francesca Bassett, and the executive producer was Aaron Fellows. The music in this series was by Miguel